Welcome to the Optum RX Pharmacy Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Drager. In this forum, we'll discuss the latest and most impactful events in pharmacy benefit management. Today's episode will focus on obesity, some of the new breakthrough treatments we're seeing enter the marketplace, and potential solutions to manage the disease appropriately. Today, I'm joined by Doctors Anna Bhatnagar, Associate Chief Medical Officer of Optum RX, and Dr. Travis Vaughn, Vice President of Clinical Solutions. Welcome, Anna and Travis. Appreciate you both joining us today. Anna, let me start with you. I've noticed that in much of the pharmaceutical direct-to-consumer advertising, the line between diabetes and obesity treatments really seems to blur. How are these two conditions related, and why does it seem that we hear so much more about both conditions lately?
Thanks, Scott. That's a great question. And both diabetes and obesity are metabolic conditions. And we're hearing so much more about them because there's some new treatments that were originally used in diabetes and now have been studied and approved for use in weight loss. Of the types of diabetes, type 2 diabetes is the most common form in adults. It's a chronic disease, and high blood sugar levels are the hallmark. More than 80% of cases of type 2 diabetes can be attributed to obesity. So there's some interrelationship there. Obesity is also a chronic condition in which individuals have a weight that's higher than what's considered healthy for their height. There's evidence that shows that certain individuals have a predisposition to obesity. And the underlying mechanisms within the body, their genetic makeup, environmental factors all contribute to a tendency to gain weight. Also, certain medications or medical conditions can lead to obesity too. What's interesting is that 30% of overweight individuals have diabetes. So not everyone who's obese has diabetes, but they do have a higher risk.
Anna, you mentioned that obesity is a chronic condition. I think most listeners, when they think about diabetes, that's obviously a chronic condition. I don't know if anybody would dispute that. Why do we think of obesity in the same way?
We can consider the chronicity of the conditions for both diabetes and for obesity, because if left untreated, we know individuals have a worse health outcome for both of them. For diabetics who are overweight or obese, weight loss can improve their control and their outcomes overall, such as heart disease and other health problems related to diabetes. And those with obesity, they have a higher risk of adverse health outcomes as well, including the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and diseases such as sleep apnea related to higher BMI.
Anna, in your opinion, why has obesity been so difficult to treat traditionally?
Like any chronic condition, Scott, the approach to treatment has to be multi-pronged and have a focus on improved overall health. The processes within the body that lead to obesity are still being researched, but the human body is designed to store energy and have a positive energy balance. For that reason, it's difficult to sustain a high-calorie restricted diet for a long time and achieve weight loss. The most successful interventions for weight loss have a goal to maintain the decrease in weight and an adherence to change in lifestyle as well. There have been many weight loss treatments available in the past, with some having up to 11% weight loss benefit. But these newer agents that we've alluded to have a greater efficacy because they have a greater response rate than previous agents. That means that more individuals taking them are likely to lose weight.
Travis, let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit more about, your area of specialty, medications. There's been a lot of mention in the lay press regarding these new wonder drugs for the treatment of obesity. What has specifically changed in how we treat this condition with pharmaceuticals? And in your opinion, are these new medications actually better?
Yeah, Scott, that is a great question. The drug landscape's evolved tremendously, and as of late, really quickly. Before these GLP-1 medications were approved for weight loss, about 8 years ago or so, we had medications that were primarily used short-term. Medications like phentermine, diethylpropion, phendimetrazine, appetite suppressants that have been on the market for some time. Over time, we had continued innovation in the obesity medication space. We had Contrave, Qsymia, approved, which are combination medications of existing FDA-approved molecules. These medications were impressive. They showed really good weight loss. There was a lot of excitement around our ability to treat obesity more effectively. And it was these agents that, in my mind, really started to pave the way for that continued pharmacologic innovation. So enter the scene GLP-1s, right? They came aboard as really a new innovation in treating diabetes, as Anna kind of talked about. It was really interesting as GLP-1s were brought to market. It was, in essence, through the clinical trials for these medications that were being studied for diabetes that the large effect on creating weight loss was first realized. These newer drugs, these newer GLP-1 drugs, on average, produce double-digit weight loss across the population. Later this year, we're likely to see the completion of what I would kind of call a monumental clinical study, the phase 3 SELECT trial, the completion of that trial that will answer the key question of whether there's a meaningful, positive cardiovascular outcome effect for obese individuals taking a GLP-1 for weight loss. There's an expectation in the industry that this connection will be confirmed and that cardiovascular health protection that's seen within GLP-1s will be seen in the results of a clinical trial. To me, Scott, that's really the quote wonder drug mentality. It's thinking around, a drug both effectively creating weight loss, but also statistically being proven to improve cardiovascular health in the long term. So if your stick of measurement is what I just said, right? Average weight loss across the population and achieved cardiovascular health, I think, yes, these are better medications, but they come with a really hefty price tag and honestly a ton of hype behind them as well. I think the question we need to evaluate deeper and think deeper on within the healthcare industry is, do these drugs produce a sustainable weight loss outcome? And how does that cardiovascular protection improve patient health in the long term? And at the root of it all, how can we manage that cost and get the price lower so the healthcare ecosystem can actually treat all patients who could benefit from these medications? The reality here is some patients, not all, they can lose weight with these high-cost GLP-1s, but there's some patients that actually wouldn't even need these high-cost GLP-1s. They could use some of the oral medications I referenced earlier or lose weight by adopting a healthier lifestyle.
Travis, you and Anna, I think, both effectively talk to that intersection between, obesity and diabetes. So I think it makes sense, at least on the surface, why there would be an intersection in terms of the medications used to treat both conditions. Can you give some specifics on, how these GLP-1s work in the body and how we think it's leading to the weight loss?
Yeah, absolutely. The mechanism of action of GLP-1s is really unique. As I referenced earlier, it was kind of uncovered, if you will, from a weight loss perspective in the evaluation of GLP-1s for treatment of diabetes. GLP-1s work a couple different ways. It comes down to understanding what GLP-1 actually is. So GLP stands for glucagon-like peptide. It's a hormone in the body that's critical in managing appetite, managing your insulin and glucagon levels. It also plays a huge role in kind of what I would just reference stomach emptying or the feeling of being full with food in your stomach. So these GLP-1 agonists, in essence, mimic these hormones in the body. So when you take the medication, it creates an effect of the patient being able to better regulate their food intake and also better manage those insulin and glucagon levels after meals. This has a couple different effects, right? Within diabetes, it has a direct effect on helping treat diabetes by, in essence, helping manage blood sugar and helping manage insulin and glucagon levels. There's that tangential effect, though, that I'm referencing where patients can lose weight for both the reason I just talked about around better management of that metabolic health balance, but also just a reduction in food intake. And I think that's really the piece to GLP-1s that was, in some ways, I think, underappreciated in the clinical trials until they actually saw the results and actually saw how they worked. Uniquely, GLP-1s are injectable. We've talked about that. The GLP-1s that are approved on the market for weight loss are injectable. There is the potential for GLP-1s to be oral. There's actually an oral GLP-1 that's approved for diabetes. So I think that's a unique kind of element to the mechanism of action, right? It's the route of administration, but I just wanted to note that, the current obesity-approved GLP-1s are injectable, but I fully anticipate in the pipeline we'll start to see oral GLP-1s over time.
Travis, how much weight loss do these new medications, these GLP-1s, typically achieve in patients? And how does that compare to some of the older pharmaceuticals you referenced a little bit earlier on in terms of their treatment of weight loss?
Yeah, it can vary, right? I think that's just a known whenever you start to look across multiple medications. But really at its core, the GLP-1 medications are seeing across the population really impressive weight loss. For the original GLP-1 that was approved for weight loss, Saxenda, on average, patients can expect to see, between a 5 to 6% weight loss. For the newer GLP-1, Wegovy, it's more like around 14 or 15%. So there's a dramatic jump between Saxenda and Wegovy. Tirzepatide, currently approved for diabetes under the brand name Mounjaro, we expect it to likely receive an approval with the outcomes exceeding about 20% weight loss. So I think, all in all, that's incredibly impressive weight loss. And compared to non-GLP-1 medications, I think across a population, it's obvious that GLP-1 medications are superior. But kind of going back to what I referenced earlier, some patients respond, incredibly well to different medications than their peers might. So it's not uncommon to see, a patient respond incredibly well to potentially a non-GLP-1 as well. One thing that I think is unique about the weight loss journey, especially with GLP-1s, is how quickly sometimes patients can lose a substantial amount of weight. In the clinical trials, tirzepatide, patients can often lose 10% or more of their body weight within 20 weeks. That to me is incredible, right? That's 5 months of once weekly dosing and your body weight reducing by 10%. So my point with all of this is there's incredible results that are being seen in the clinical trials. These are new studies, right? We're not doing a whole bunch of redo studies of the old products, but the old products work really well also.
Travis, I mentioned in the beginning of my comments, really, when Anna and I were conversing, the fact that this line between diabetes and in weight loss has really blurred. A medication, Ozempic, which is a GLP-1 medication, was heavily advertised, originally started as being used in the treatment of diabetes. There were reports in the lay press that physicians were starting to use this treatment to aid in weight loss as well. I think, I read an article 2 weeks ago about this Ozempic face, this condition associated with Ozempic. Recently, over the last year, a new medication, you referenced it here just a few minutes ago, came to the market called Wegovy. My understanding is that both Ozempic and Wegovy are the same drug chemically. Can these two medications be used interchangeably for weight loss?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? It's honestly an incredibly dense topic that includes a ton of different subtopics underneath. I would just lead with it. The perspective really depends on who you ask. In the end, the way I would describe it, Ozempic and Wegovy, they're both branded semaglutide products. They're different strengths. They're studied and tailored to their respective indications, Ozempic being for treatment of diabetes, Wegovy for treatment of obesity. They're not able to simply be interchanged via the package labeling. But pharmacologically, I think we all recognize the drugs are nearly identical. I think some of the press and some of the conversations that blur the line here could be just a reflection of, Ozempic being first to the market, right? It was the first semaglutide product on the market, followed by Wegovy after that, focused on weight loss. So, there could just be almost some market confusion, whether that's unintentional or intentional by pharma. There definitely is confusion, and I think that's what you're referencing, Scott. The bottom line is prescribers should be prescribing Ozempic for diabetes patients for treatment, Wegovy should be prescribed for non-diabetic patients for treatment of obesity. Obviously, you shouldn't be on both at the same time.
So I think the question, that consumers especially want to know, how much do these new weight loss medications, these GLP-1s, typically cost?
They're not cheap. The net price of these medications on average, hover between $800 and $900 per month. That puts the total annual cost around north of $10,000 per year. The previous weight loss medications prior to GLP-1s were much less expensive. The oldest ones being Phentermin and others that I referenced earlier. Those were under $100 per month for sure. With some of the newer ones, Qsymia and Contrave, being slightly more than that. So there's a dramatic difference in cost between the older medications and the newer. And I think that's really what underpins the need to think creatively about management here. Because as I referenced earlier, some patients respond to non-GLP-1s, but some need this GLP-1 treatment. And I think it'll be interesting as organizations get more involved in the management of obesity, how to manage not just to outcomes to promote weight loss, but manage to cost as well. We need to get the cost down.
Anna, from your perspective, do you believe that these new drugs are safe? What type of side effects do patients typically see when using these types of medications?
So, Scott, the drugs that we're referencing, the GLP-1s, as Travis noted, we've been using for many years in the diabetes space. Wegovy, for instance, that was approved for weight loss in June of 2021, is really the same chemical as the drug Ozempic that you referenced, which has been approved since 2017 to treat type 2 diabetes. So we have some years under our belt with these chemical entities being used, and they have a pretty good safety profile. However, the drugs work by slowing down stomach emptying as one of the mechanisms of action. And so the common side effects that we see are nausea, constipation, and abdominal discomfort. There is a risk for certain individuals that have predisposition to hereditary cancers, and they should talk to their doctors about the risks with use of these medications, the GLP-1s, and those particular cancers.
With some of the older weight loss medications, the rate of recidivism, that the tendency to gain the weight back is rather high. How sustainable is the weight loss with these GLP-1 medications?
So that is a question that remains to be answered. The evidence behind the GLP medications is really exciting, but what we have is an absence of long-term studies. We need that additional research on the long-term outcomes for outcomes like sustainable weight loss. However, in saying that, some individuals may benefit from short-term use of weight loss agents to lose enough weight that they derive a clinically meaningful benefit. We've seen that even 5% of weight loss can improve diabetes control and other health outcomes. So sometimes it's not a lot of weight that individuals need to lose. So we have to think about it in the full context that we don't really know what the long-term outcome will be or long-term sustainability will be with the GLP-1s, but sometimes just a bit of weight loss will change diabetes control or other health conditions.
Travis, you oversee clinical solution development at Optum Rx. As you look at how to address obesity across the population that you serve, what elements are critical when addressing obesity, and how do you plan to incorporate those elements into a solution?
I think of this from two lenses, a patient lens and a payer lens as far as the elements, right? So from a patient lens, we've got to respect the fact that all patients are unique with obesity, right? They're on their own kind of weight loss journey. They have their unique, probably, journey that brought them to a place of having obesity as a chronic condition. We've got to personalize, right, the potential qualification for treatment at the patient level, and also personalize the support that we deliver to that patient so they can achieve the behavioral change that drives the weight loss in partnership with the pharmacologic treatment. And that piece really is the foundation of what we're developing. As we just discussed, right, a huge concern with these medications is the duration of therapy needed to achieve weight loss, but going alongside that, the durability of that achieved weight loss. Patients will lose weight, right? They will if they follow behavioral change and use pharmacologic treatment by and large. But will they keep it off, right? That's a core kind of underpinning of the solutions that we're developing. There, of course, may be patients who stay on the medication long term, whether that be for treatment of their diabetes or, as I referenced earlier, perhaps, to contribute to cardiovascular health protection. If the studies later this year come forth that indicate long-term treatment might be warranted in certain populations for that reason. So it'll come down to, how we're managing these different cohorts of populations, if you will. And also, if members transition off of the medication, how can we support them and how can we help them ensure that they sustain their weight loss and continue down kind of that healthy pathway? That's really the patient lens, Scott. The client lens, these drugs are expensive. Everyone seems to want them, right? Regardless of in some cases, regardless of if they're even clinically overweight or obese, or regardless of if they've tried any of the lower cost options. So, that alongside kind of the fact that some patients don't have the same motivation levels as other patients really, starts to paint the picture for a product that really needs to ensure that motivation and program participation to create behavioral change is a cornerstone of a solution. Our solution needs to solve all these areas, not just the motivation and behavioral change piece, but managing access up front, getting that cost as low as possible through creative levers that we may be able to pull from a formulary and utilization management perspective. So this solution will come to life pulling all those components together to help plans manage their weight loss drug costs, help members achieve their weight loss, and ensure that sustained weight loss long-term is achieved to improve the patient's overall health.
Ian, I want to conclude with this. What type of things would you recommend patients consider before asking their physician about treatments for obesity? And how will they know it's the right time to see their physician?
Scott, I think we've pulled this thread through our entire conversation here, is that the goal of treatment of any chronic condition, even obesity, is really to support overall health and health outcomes and quality of life. So that decision will be individual to each patient. While these newer medications have brought this conversation to the forefront and in our common discussions, there are a lot of options available for individuals that need treatment for the chronic condition of obesity. Health benefits are seen with a weight loss as little as 5%, and patients should discuss that with their healthcare provider and the options available to them that will optimize their weight loss goals and their need to manage those other conditions.
Anna and Travis, thank you for lending us your expertise today. Thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Drager. Tune in again for more discussions as we examine the most important issues in pharmacy care services.